Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Volodymyr Sologub. Right now we're at Odesa Security Forum. And join me now to talk about the security challenges Ukraine is currently facing is the advisor to the President of Ukraine on a volunteer basis on the national security and defense matters, and former head of Security Service of Ukraine, Mr. Igor Smeshko. Mr. Smeshko, welcome to Ukraine Today.
Thank you.
So, the most recent withdrawal of Russian troops from Syria, does that mean that Ukraine should expect the more fighting in the east of Ukraine? Does that mean that the situation in the east will escalate?
There isn't, I think, direct connections with the withdrawal of Russian troops, and by the way, this is quite a modest amount of the troops were withdrawn from Syria. Russia still has quite respected capacity over there. But of course, Russia would receive not, let's say, enforcement with this small quantity of manpower and aircrafts, jets which return back, but Russia will have more time to be engaged in Ukrainian affairs.
Basically, Ukraine is back to square one. Basically, the world's attention is now focused on ISIS in light of the most recent horrible attacks in Brussels. Everybody is focused there, so the attention is diverted from Russia, the attention is diverted from Ukraine, and Russia will basically start meddling with Ukraine's affairs again. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, of course, because the goal of Russian Federation is the same: to become the world power, to stop United EU-Arab project, go further to their border, to do their best to eliminate the possibility of United States to be engaged in European affairs, and once again to show in EU-Arab that Russia is in charge what is going in. And in this regard, until now, President Putin makes success. We are supposed to acknowledge this. Russia doesn't have economic resources of the West. Russia seriously doesn't have military resources like the West. But Russia has authoritarian regime and decision-making process very short. And I would say President Putin all the time makes his step with the white chess figure, and the West all the time opposite of this. And to react, democratic procedure, how to think, that is, I think, for the West, the main important thing right now, just to think, do we have any strategy at all, common strategy, toward protection Euro-Atlantic civilization, toward reaction of the attempts of Russia to destroy these civilization capabilities to develop peacefully in EU-Arab. Russia has strategy. This is great Russia for any expense. And to quit this danger, it's supposed to have strategy. And once again, Kiev and Ukraine, this is not because I'm Ukrainian, but this is the largest country in EU-Arab. This is basically the country which already gave for all the world proof that we have developed civil society. Our civil society is pregnant for real democracy. Twice this civil society stopped dictatorship development in the country and the Russian style. But we need also the concept from the West, strategic concept. From success of democracy, develop economy in Ukraine, it depends future not only the Euro-Atlantic civilization, especially in Europe, but also future of Russia.
And join me now to discuss the security threats which Ukraine is currently facing is the Ambassador of the United States to Ukraine, Mr. Jeffrey Pyatt. Mr. Pyatt, welcome to Ukraine Today, and many thanks for finding the time to talk to us.
Great to see you, Volodymyr.
What are the main security challenges which you see for Ukraine at this point?
Well, I think it was very interesting to me this morning in the remarks that I made and that the Turkish ambassador made that we were so much converging in our messages, which is really that Ukraine has to fight two wars. There is a military conflict with Russia, which tragically continues in the East today. You will have strong support from the United States and many of our allies in helping you to prevail in that effort. Both the Turkish ambassador and I talked about the importance of standing on the principle of non-recognition of the annexation of Crimea, another dimension of Russia's aggression against your country. But just as important is the domestic front and the battle to reform institutions, to attack corruption, to build a judiciary which enjoys public confidence.
Because again, during your remarks today, you said that how we, the international community, react to and answer Russia's use of force to change international borders will be critical to the future security and prosperity of this region. How big of a threat is this Russia's military aggression to the security of the entire region, of the entire Europe?
So I think the message is that it's critically important that we stand together as an international community, as we have done over the past 2 years, to make clear that this is not acceptable, that it represents a violation by Russia of the most fundamental principles of Euro-Atlantic security, and an open challenge to the rules of the international system. Well, I think it's very clear that many of Ukraine's neighbors see this threat. The United States has been very clear in terms of our commitment through the European Reassurance Initiative to stand by our NATO obligations to Ukraine's neighbors who are part of the NATO alliance. Again, all of us have a stake in what's happening here in Ukraine, and all of us have a stake in upholding the principles involved.
Hybrid Solutions for the Security in the Black Sea Region conference has kicked off in Odesa. During a two-day event, defense and security experts will discuss the main security threats in the Black Sea area and the ways to address them.
As a background from security standpoint, we oftentimes will look at all security issues as being those that need to have a hard military response. However, I am a believer, and I will use a quick quote, and a quick quote that came out of a book I just recently read, that Gazprom is more powerful than the Russian army. And if you take that and extend it to this kind of discussion that we've had here, where we think about things like energy systems, large corporate activities, people power versus military power is more important, if you would. And as a result, I feel that my hybrid solution is to flip things around from a military first response, be thinking about how we can organize from what we would consider a soft power aspect to put together all the resources that the people actually hold the capability. It's education, it's industry, it's all those things that we have talked about in the conference here that bring people together. That is the strength of the community and strength of the country. And that will be much more powerful when we look at security than would it be to put that same amount of effort into hard power.
In my opinion, security is not only military security, but also the economic security for the state. If the state owns and earns more money, then it can provide and invest into the different levels of security. So my idea on this panel was to present the drafted law, which was registered in our Verkhovna Rada, in our parliament. This law is named the Law on Inland Waterways, which is also known under the name of Law of Kozyrь-Kononenko, who are the leading authors of this bill. I'm the co-author, and we are proposing to open, in simple words, to open the inland waterways like rivers Dnieper, Dniester, and Danube for the ships under the foreign flags, attract more free tonnage in order to carry more goods down the rivers to our seaports, hence provide more work spaces, develop the inland waterways, develop the river terminals, build new ones or rebuild the existing ones. Also, this will be a very good multiple effect for our ship repair and shipbuilding industry of Ukraine.
I think the beginnings of a solution to the problem of hybrid warfare is in trying to understand what hybridity means in this case. I think that the way that this notion is often used is confused or ambiguous. Usually what one sees is that it's used as to denote a fusion of warlike acts and aims and means of activity that fall below the threshold of traditional war. So if you look at, for example, the domain of cyberspace, which is my own, what you see is that cyber instruments are increasingly used to achieve aims that would have required the use of traditional war beforehand. So if you look at cyberspace, what you see is that cyber instruments are being used to cause the kinds of effects such as the disruption of the economy or financial system of a small nation like Estonia, that happened in 2007, in a way that falls below the traditional threshold of war. So what I think is quite interesting and novel is not so much the fusion of war and non-war, but the way in which sub-threshold forms of attack like cyber attacks can cause traditional forms of harm without incurring the traditional penalties that a traditional act of war would incur.
The Alliance New Energy of Ukraine implements new energy solutions to solve all the problems in our world. In our portfolio, we have several projects in defense, space, and energy sectors. It's a project, it's a very beautiful project, I think. Project to use rotational of the Earth to produce electricity, to generate electricity, or rotation other planets, or sea waves to generate electricity. Production of space engines for small satellites. Production UAVs and special combat drones. We have project of cleaner satellite, etc. We invest money in these areas and looking for partners for this. But I think very big problem in our world is money itself. I think in future our world will go away from big role of money in our life. Yes, now we use it, but in future I think we will change the situation. New generation and new ideas for new people, for new generation of our world.
I think the main thing what we need is to develop very fast. Development brings peace, development brings security. Ukraine has huge, vast potential to develop, but if it fails to develop, it also is facing huge risks. We need to basically tackle corruption, build roads, develop healthcare and social systems, and basically open opportunities for the people, notwithstanding their ethnic or religious or linguistic background. And that's the recipe for this part of the world. Fast development, prospect for the future, and people will consolidate around this idea, and they will develop their own genuine democracies.
I see no solutions in the foreseeable future. The present situation has come about not only as a result of Russia's revanchist military operations in Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and now in Ukraine, but also because of more than 2 decades of complete neglect by the United States, NATO, and the European Union of the security situation in Europe's east.
One of the first things is to bring the issue to light and keep it at the forefront and not let it just fall by the wayside as other things develop in the world, the United States, but to keep a light and focus on it so that people can work on solutions.
Well, since Ukraine is facing now the hybrid challenges that ranges all the way from military, hard security issues to some soft issues related to reforms, economy situation, then we need to think about various tools to address all of those aspects and various facets of those challenges that I've just mentioned. First of all, we need to come up with stronger solutions to make our army, military forces stronger, and not just in a tactical way, but in terms of a foreseeable future and strategic sense as well. And we need support from the West for that as well. I suppose for Ukrainian army and military being in good position, because Russia obviously is not going to be stopping being a dangerous neighbor for us. But then also going on with reforms and political liberalization that's still needed, because the reforms are still pretty much in this phase of rhetorics, and that's important, because if we only stop the war or win the war on the battlefronts, the actual hot war, then we still need to fight the war in quotation marks, dealing with those reforms and liberalization and fighting corruption, because there will be little sense of winning that war against Russia and then moving forward in terms of political, democratic, economic transformation. So, and there are many issues, and there is the energy issue, and Ukraine has done its lot recently. We've cut our dependence on Russian natural gas, but there is much to done as well. There should be transparency brought in this sphere as well. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of the access to the coal mines and some of the shale gas as well. But right now we are moving in the right direction in terms of improving a situation with Ukraine's energy security. And the list goes on, because the challenges are so manifold. But we just need to think about all those issues at the same time and dealing with all of them at the same time.
Propaganda is not a sideshow, it's not a bad word, it's the game is the name of the game. We have to fight for the hearts and minds of the people whose decisions are absolutely the determining factor of what's going to be the end of this confrontation. Where is it against Russia? It's against the Daesh. It's a question of living up to our values. And for that, we have to win the battle of the popular culture. And for that, it's absolutely essential cinema and television. In the Second World War, Hollywood did a fantastic effort of capturing the minds of the whole world, with examples like Casablanca. We have to do something similar now. Too much is at stake, and now, much more than in the Second World War, it's a battle for the hearts and minds of the people.
Almost to the day, exactly 2 years ago, 57 participating states of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, have decided to deploy a special monitoring mission to Ukraine. Ever since then, me and my colleagues have been working in Ukraine and for Ukraine. And that mandate has now just been extended for yet another year until March 2017. We are the eyes and ears of the international community in Ukraine. We promote peace and stability and try to foster normalization. However, we are not the hands that can actually bring about this stability. We are there to support them both with objective information and reports that shall help those who need to make these critical decisions to foster stability here. And at the end of the day, behind all our actions stands the civilian and the civilian population of Ukraine on both sides of the contact line, those who are suffering most from this never-ending conflict, and the mission is determined to continue to work in Ukraine and for Ukraine.
And we've discussed during the conference that the very strong posture of the Russian Federation in the Baltic Black Sea information space requires a non-linear response. That is the creation of the Baltic Black Sea information community, and that community shall be based on the commonality of values between the countries and the nations that are forming that space, and that have that historic and mental and cultural commonality and common heritage. And that what's even more important, that have common threats, and that have to find that common solution and common response to these threats and challenges. And as a practical solution, we suggest to build up a multilingual, multinational, multimedia hub that will be creating that common information space, will be funding that common response, and will be building up the new messages, and will become the great channel for the propagation and dissemination of those messages in all spheres, not only the news, but also the the entertainment, the cultural, and other types of the content, which is very important.
Black Sea area is very important for me because my grandfathers came from Crimea. I'm a Crimean Tatar. And also during my career, Navy career, I had commanded international task groups, including warships from all littoral states, Russia, Ukraine. And there was a peace in Black Sea. And there was a regional cooperation. We had created Black Sea 4, we had created Operation Black Sea Harmony. So littoral navies and littoral countries were creating their own regional solutions and regional cooperation. We should do this again. So my hybrid solution is very easy. I will refer to our founder, Kemal Atatürk. In his words, he says, peace at home, peace in the world. So the hybrid solution is this: peace at home, peace in the world. There should be a regional cooperation among these littoral states, and there should be peace in the region.
From my experience, one of the solutions we can execute is to keep the dialogue open and get as many parties involved. Because hybrid solution cannot be just solved by security or law enforcement agencies. It's not only what the government should do. I think all parties of our society, including civil society and governmental structures, expert community, both Ukrainian and international, should continue the dialogue. And in this dialogue, we could find viable solutions, not only for this problem, but for others.
Well, as the name implies, hybrid solutions implies a diversity of thought. And my idea, I guess, for a hybrid solution, and what I would tell people, is engage the population. I think the best solutions come when the more people who are engaged in diversity of thought, and it's outside of government, it's the people that need to be engaged in this and take ownership and responsibility for their government, and not just assume it's going to be those guys who solve the problem. It really comes from the diversity of thought by leveraging the power of diversity from a multitude of people, and begins with everyday people just becoming more active and involved in their entrepreneurial role in helping build the economy and helping drive the country forward, and engaging the political system in finding the solution. While I don't know specifically what the solution is, I think the solutions are out there, but only through the engagement of a diversity of thought that comes really from the people.
Well, what you're experiencing here is part of a sort of a very modern condition where media, which is what I focus on, and social media play a very big part in trying to destabilize another country. And I think there's one very important thing that we have to recognize. It's a question of what is contemporary communication, what is contemporary propaganda, both in the positive and negative sense of that word. So in the 20th century, it's all about a limited amount of media, and each side try to shout their way through. So, the Russians would try to shout one thing, communism is good, and the West would try to shout, no, capitalism is good. It's a very easy kind of debate, like two lightsabers. Now we live in a world, and especially in Odesa, where I think Odesa has 44 TV channels, myriads of websites. Everybody lives in their own little media bubble. And what the Russians, various other movements across the world have discovered, that in contemporary propaganda, there's no point screaming one message because audiences are fractured. And they've got very, very good at changing their messages, changing their approaches for every audience. And in a way, we have to be a little bit like that as well. So when we think about doing, I hate this word, counter-messaging, instead of screaming, the West is great, NATO is great, the EU is great, Ukraine is wonderful, we actually have to listen and understand local audiences very, very well and adapt our messages to, why is democracy important for them? Why is Ukraine important for them? It might not be for the same reason it's important to somebody in Kiev. So today's propaganda is all about listening, actually, and not screaming. And that's something we have to start understanding very, very fast? Because at the moment, Russia, ISIS, and other malign forces are way ahead of the curve.
Well, when we're looking for a hybrid solution, and the word hybrid means maybe something unconventional, almost asymmetrical, unexpected, I'm not sure if we should force ourselves to think that way so much. If what we see is unpredictability, that is a problem, well, why not insist on being predictable on our part? If we see something that is against international law, we should, I think, stick to international law. Whatever we react, whatever our solutions are, should be legitimate in that respect. In the Black Sea, there has been, I think, a need for a culture of compromise, a culture of cooperation. Let's do that exactly. Let's not break bonds of cooperation, just do the opposite. So I think that could be our, in quotas, a hybrid solution. I think there is a lot of potential in the Black Sea. We've not used it sufficiently in the last 20 plus years. Now is the time to do it, I think.
My topic was the role of the agriculture in the security system of Ukraine. As to me, agriculture is really the top priority sector of the Ukrainians' economy in terms of security. And not just because the security of any state is reduced to ensure the basic needs of its citizens, one of which is food. But because Ukraine possesses 30% of the world's richest black soil. Moreover, if the state security is based on artificial sources of energy, such security system can be wrecked by eliminating these sources. Gas and oil fields, as well as mines and power plants, have clear coordinates, and therefore they can be ruined. Fields and farms, evenly covering the whole country, are impossible to destroy. Natural energy source that feeds agriculture, the sun, humanity, fortunately, have not yet learned to wipe out. That's why agriculture is the top priority sector for the security of Ukraine.
The Black Sea region, especially since the end of the Cold War, has gone through a number of changes. And one of the things that has occurred, at least over the last 26 or so years, has been the beginning of some nascent regional economic cooperation through the BSEC and, of course, through wider links, linking Europe to Central Asia and Asia in terms of transport and energy and so on. So this is, the non-sexy side of cooperation that has been going on among the countries of the region. But what one can see is, over the last few years, there has been a worsening of the situation, right? One can start maybe even before, but at least with the war between Georgia and Russia in August 2008, and since then with the developments between Russia and Ukraine with the annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. And what this does is that, so what you have is a number of hardening of mentalities and borders. And therefore, because relations between and among regional states are suffering as a result, this would tend to undo a lot of the work that's been done on the economic cooperation level. And now, if one were in Moscow, or one is in Kiev, or one is in Tbilisi, or Baku, or Yerevan, or Bucharest and Sofia, Ankara, one would see that there is benefit, though, at working regionally together. Because ultimately, if the region is a transit zone for transport between Asia and Europe, be it because the Europeans want it to be it because the Chinese want it to be with the Silk Road. If the region is important because it's also a transit zone, not only transit zone, but as a region because of its energy resources, right?
Ukraine has a crisscrossing network of pipelines. Turkey has ambitions to do this. Other countries are producers. You cannot undo this even though relations politically, militarily have deteriorated. And so what one has to concentrate is, yes, I mean, Ukraine, for example. Ukraine has to insist on its changing foreign policy. It looks towards the West, has to insist that it belongs to the West, and hopefully NATO allies and EU partners will follow through and at some stage bring in Ukraine closer, while Ukraine is also clearly has defined its future as belonging to the West. But at the same time, it has to work on making sure that the regional cooperation, economic cooperation, which is, it's low politics. It's not something that would break up relations between countries. That goes on. It cannot be undone. Because ultimately, the issue would be that the losses will be suffered by all the countries of the region. So one has to make use of, the potential of the sea, its maritime potential. One has to make use of the potential of inland waterways. One has to make use of the potential of roads that, go across borders, telecoms, electricity grids. All these things, one cannot undo them just because politically a country has decided to, and rightly so, Georgia, Ukraine, to move towards the West, and Russia is not happy with it. So I think this is where one needs to focus on.
Я хочу сказать, что это один из основных факторов, и пускай мы сегодня еще не найдем все ответы на все вопросы, которые сегодня ставит перед нами новое время, основное это то, что касается энергобезопасности и перехода на альтернативные виды топлива. Это снимает нас от зависимости поставок нефти, газа, и в том числе сейчас и угля, так как проблемы с углем связаны с проблемами на востоке нашей страны.
It involves getting Ukraine back on a fully democratic path, rooted in rule of law, fighting corruption, making sure that the political leaders are responsive to what the Ukrainian people want, while at the same time defending its country from the Russian threat and aggression. And the West needs to do more to help Ukraine in defending against Russian aggression by providing lethal assistance to Ukraine. But these things go together. You can't only deal with one issue and not the other. They have to go hand in hand. And we need to see a more serious campaign from Ukraine's political leaders to fight corruption in Ukraine, which frankly is a cancer in this country. And without dealing with it, all the efforts in the East and fending off Russian aggression will amount to very little.
Now, my solution will be that, first of all, we need to further societal rapprochement, because the EU countries, such as Spain and Ukraine, have been developing separately. So when the Ukrainian, so-called Ukrainian crisis, the Maidan, blew up, many Spaniards were not cognizant of the context in your country and the democratic challenges, etc. So rather than just symmetry and big talk, we need to bring young Ukrainians of the new Ukraine to Spain and vice versa, so that they meet with the new voices of civil society and understand each other better, understand each other better as Europeans, and that will eventually trickle up through the system.
Corruption at the highest level of government is nothing less than the ruination and betrayal of a nation. Ukraine is a good example of this. Its huge material and human losses of the last two years are the direct consequence of 20 years of corruption, during which its national security was sold off for personal profit. Ukrainians must view corruption in their country for what it is, not simply a criminal act, and not simply an expression of human greed and dishonesty, but as a hostile internal occupying force, as dangerous as any external invasion. When corruption reaches the levels it has reached in Ukraine, there is one and only one person who can do something about it: the president. He is the nation's top law enforcement authority and commander-in-chief. He is the only one who can mobilize sufficient public support to overcome resistance to anti-corruption programs. It can be merely it cannot be merely another item on his long to-do list, but it must be at the very top of his agenda. Corruption can be defeated. Many other countries have progressed from endemic to only occasional corruption. It requires a strategy and political will. There are dozens of successful models that can be replicated, but the president must lead and the people will follow.
One hybrid solution that I can offer for peace and security in the Black Sea region and beyond is to recall dignity and recognize that black is black, white is white, and not to be afraid to speak the truth and support dignity, oneself and those of others.